My name is Diane Sweeney, and I'm the author of Student-Centered Coaching, The Moves, and Leading Student-Centered Coaching. And I'm excited to share these practices because what coaching, in my mind, is really about is making sure kids are growing and teachers are growing. And so keeping the eye on the prize of student growth first and teacher growth second is the really measure we use when we think about best practices for coaching. The first practice that we'd avoid using as a coach is getting out into classrooms early in the school year to observe teachers to see how they're doing. Because what happens is that creates a sense of distance between the coach and the teachers. And it may even send a signal that the coach is more like an assistant principal and could create distrust. Because if somebody just pops in to observe your teaching, there's always an ulterior motive, and teachers are always wondering, why are you here? And also, a lot of times, this is done with the intention of sharing back with the principal. How's the instruction looking in the school? Can you give me your perspective on that as the coach? And we suggest avoiding that practice because of the damage it can do to trust when we really want to get real coaching cycles going quickly, which are coaching cycles that are about setting goals for student learning and working collaboratively to get them there. And at the same time also using great instructional practices together and learning how to use those. So you see the collaboration that happens in our coaching cycles, and you see the difference of observing and maybe even doing walkthroughs as a coach, how that can damage the perception of coaching among teachers and really honestly make them distrust the process. So we just suggest that this lives on the plate of the school leader. The idea of getting in and seeing how teaching is looking in your school is a big move for leaders to make. Doesn't mean you have to spend hours and hours. It means regular visits into classrooms to see what's teaching looking like. And frequency is definitely more important than duration on these visits. Get in regularly, set a goal to get into classrooms every day, even if it's for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and let teachers understand that you're the one making the decisions about how their teaching is going instead of asking a coach to do that. The second practice that we'd suggest for coaches to avoid is using checklists to monitor whether or not teachers are implementing expected instructional practices. And sometimes we use these because we think it creates transparency, and we think, well, if teachers know what we're looking for, if we give them the checklist of what we're looking for, well, then they're in a position to be able to do what we're asking. But for the same reasons that the previous practice undermines coaching, this does as well. There are definitely needs to have very clear instructional expectations throughout a school. And these practices may live on a list somewhere. In fact, coaches may build these practices and should be building these practices into their regular coaching work with teachers. But they do it in a way that's embedded in day-to-day teaching and learning instead of walking around with a clipboard and practices, listed, trying to see if to what degree these practices are being used. You can see how close to the evaluation this is. And again, it really undermines the trust in coaching, and it puts the coach in a position of being viewed as being an arm of the administration. And there really aren't, if that's the role of the coach, they should probably just be actually an administrator. So not being confusing to teachers about roles by using practices that may not align necessarily with the role that the coach is there to play. Practice that we'd recommend avoiding is the practice of just managing initiatives all the time for a coach. And this oftentimes happens when a coach doesn't have a model to follow. It can happen when a coach is unsure of what their day-to-day work should look like. So they'll fill their time with things, because we all do. We don't want to sit around waiting. So what happens is coaches will become all things data or all things curriculum, guided reading materials or assessments or tutoring programs or anything. You can definitely fill in the blank here. The thing is we want to allocate about 60% of a coach's time to coaching cycles. And that's the reason for that is because coaching cycles are where coaches make their measurable impact on teaching and learning. And it's another way to really make sure coaches' roles are actually coaching. And so the notion of a coach being off managing programs or initiatives or materials or the like, that again dilutes the role of the coach, because teachers will say to themselves, why would I be coached by somebody who's the data person? That's not their role. And the reason why they're perceived that way is because that's not what they're doing on a regular basis. So I'm truly a believer that we are really, truly, the behaviors we use day to day are how people perceive us. So if we're doing one thing all the time, that's going to be the role that we're perceived to have in a school. So we just want to be careful not to take too much time for those sorts of things. And when we say 60% of time in coaching cycles, that's obviously once the year's up and running and the coach is up and running. But that leaves 40% of time for other things. So there's going to be a little bit of management of programs and materials and curriculum. It's just not all a coach does. And we're trying to always stay a little bit on the more side for coaching cycles and on the less side for everything else. I hope this was helpful. If you're interested in these videos, subscribe to them, and then you'll get to see them when new ones come out right away, so you won't miss anything. And if you're interested in any follow-up, if you have questions or anything, you can reach us at dianesweeney.com. Thanks so much. Have a great school year.